Riddles in the Dark isn't just one of the most iconic chapters in Tolkien's The Hobbit. It's a turning point for the entire Lord of the Rings epic. A battle of wits, a game with deadly stakes, and the quiet beginning of something far more powerful than either character realizes. Welcome to Literary Rover. The riddle game in Tolkien's The Hobbit may look like a simple contest of wit, but beneath the surface it carries the weight of ancient tradition, myth, and high stakes contests. In Riddles in the Dark, when Bilbo faces Gollum, the question isn't just whether he can answer cleverly, but why Gollum himself honors the rules at all. In this essay, we'll explore the deep history of the riddle game, its role in myth and literature, and why Tolkien made it the centerpiece of one of the saga's most pivotal chapters. The chapter Riddles in the Dark has always intrigued me, not only as our first proper introduction to Gollum and the Ring, but in the curious way Gollum behaves when he enters into the contest with Bilbo. So, what exactly is the riddle game, and where does it come from, and what does it mean? To begin with, it has always raised one burning question in my mind. Why does Gollum not cheat right away? Why does this ruthless and calculating creature adhere to the rules of a simple, childish game when he holds all the advantage in their chance encounter? Why does he not just throttle Bilbo right off and be done with it? To find out, let's start by looking closely at the riddle game, what it is and what it is not, to try and find the answer to the mystery of riddles in the dark. We all know what the riddle game is on a surface level, a contest of question and answer between two players, each trying to outsmart the other. It's fairly straightforward if you only look at it as a bit of verbal sparring. But here's the thing, while the riddle game may seem simple, it's actually a game of immense antiquity, with rules that are surprisingly well established and a high degree of honor attached to it. And in many versions of this game, there is a very real element of danger involved. This isn't just a simple children's game to while away the time. In many of its historical incarnations, losing the riddle game didn't just cost you your honor, it could cost you your life. Here, we're going to dive into the meaning behind the game, its historical roots, and the reasons Tolkien used it for the famous showdown between Gollum and Bilbo in Riddles in the Dark, which I think many would agree is one of the most important chapters, not only in The Hobbit, but in the entire Lord of the Rings saga. Because once you dig into it, you realize the riddle game is much more than just a game. The riddle game's fame comes partly from how long it's been around and partly from the fact that nearly every culture seems to have its own version of it. Its origins reach far back into antiquity. Most people today, if asked to name a famous riddle game from history, would probably go straight to ancient Greece and the riddle of Oedipus and the Sphinx. But that's almost certainly not the beginning of the tradition. There is strong evidence that riddles were part of Egyptian culture, written on papyrus scrolls millennia before Sophocles. In their earliest form, riddles were more than just mental exercises. They could serve as teaching tools, cultural memory banks, or as a test of intelligence. In some traditions, a ruler might pose riddles to visiting emissaries as a way of gauging their wisdom and worthiness. In others, riddles were interwoven with religious or mystical symbolism, and solving them was seen as a kind of initiation into the mysteries. In any case, the game has always carried with it the excitement of outsmarting an opponent and the prestige of doing so in public. Fast forward then to the medieval period, and we will find riddles embedded in the literature of that time too. Tolkien, being an Oxford professor and a scholar of Old English, would have been more than familiar with the Exeter Book. This was a 10th century manuscript filled with Old English poetry, including almost 100 riddles. Many of these are wonderfully constructed, full of double meanings and playful metaphors, and a healthy dose of bawdy humor and innuendo. The medieval mind, despite the stereotype of piety, had a keen taste for the cheeky and the lewd. But riddles weren't just intellectual amusements or silly jokes. They could also be social performances, displays of wit, humor, and risk-taking, especially when the riddle touched on taboo subjects. The challenge was partly in the content, partly in the delivery, and partly in the high-stakes social dance between challenger and challenged. This brings us to The Hobbit. When Bilbo finds himself face to face with Gollum on the shores of the underground lake beneath the Misty Mountains, the choice to engage in a riddle game is not just a quirky narrative flourish. It's a deliberate invocation of a very old tradition. Certainly on the surface, it's just a way to decide if Bilbo will get directions out of the goblin mines or become Gollum's dinner. But on a deeper level, it's a way for Tolkien to frame this encounter in terms of ritualized contest and to draw on that ancient cross cultural history of the riddle as a gatekeeping device. The riddle game has often been used as a literal gateway in stories. Answer correctly and you pass through, fail and you're done for. And this is exactly the function it serves in the Oedipus myth. Oedipus meets the Sphinx, who poses her famous riddle: what walks on 4 legs in the morning, 2 legs at noon, and 3 in the evening? Answer wrongly and you're devoured. Answer correctly and you may proceed. The parallel with Gollum and Bilbo's situation is nearly exact, right down to Gollum threatening to eat Bilbo should he fail to give the correct answers. In both cases, the challenger is a guardian figure. The Sphinx is a monster barring entry to Thebes. Gollum is the master of his underground lake, and the one being who can guide Bilbo through the goblin tunnels to safety. Both are more than willing to kill, but both are also willing, at least temporarily, to abide by the rules of the game. Gollum's character makes the comparison even closer. He's not just a monster, he's a divided creature, much the same as the Sphinx, who is part human, part beast. On one side, we have Smeagol, the hobbit-like figure he once was, social, curious, and fond of games. On the other, we have Gollum, the twisted, paranoid, and violent persona shaped by centuries of obsession with the ring. His habit of talking to himself, what is it, precious? Is it tasty? Is it juicy? Is a constant internal dialogue, almost like a private riddle game in which each side of his personality tries to outguess the other. When Bilbo stumbles into Gollum's lair, the immediate impulse, the Gollum side, is to kill him. But the Smeagol side, perhaps stirred by the novelty of having someone to talk to, proposes the riddle game. And here's where it gets fascinating. This is one of the very few moments in Tolkien's narrative where Gollum voluntarily enters into a fair contest. For all his treachery elsewhere, here he agrees to follow the rules. If Bilbo wins, he gets shown the way out. If Gollum wins, he gets to eat Bilbo whole. From a purely strategic standpoint, this makes no sense for Gollum. He has every advantage. He could simply attack. But here we see the power of the riddle game's cultural weight. Even in Gollum's fractured mind, the riddle game is still considered sacred enough to obey, at least at first. In that sense, the scene plays out almost like a formal duel. There's an unspoken agreement to pause hostilities and measure each other through a different form of combat: words instead of weapons, to use wit instead of brute force. And the beauty of it, from a narrative standpoint, is that this is the one area where Bilbo actually stands a chance. Against Gollum's physical strength, he'd be crushed, but against Gollum's riddling, he can hold his own. The sequence of riddles they trade has echoes of both medieval and classical traditions. Some are playful, some are tricky, some are grounded in the natural world. There's a rhythm to it, each player answering, then posing a new challenge. Each victory or near miss raises the tension of the exchange. Tolkien's choice to write the riddles themselves in rhymed verse harks back to oral storytelling traditions, where rhythm and meter made riddles easier to remember and more fun to perform. Then at last comes the breaking point. Bilbo asks, "What have I got in my pocket?" It's not really a riddle at all, and depending on how you read the scene, Bilbo either cheats outright or exploits a loophole in the rules. For Gollum, this is infuriating. The game, which had been a rare island of order in his chaotic existence, suddenly feels corrupted and unfair. The rules have been violated. That, coupled with Gollum's eventual realization that the ring is missing, pushes him over the edge into a psychotic rage. This is the moment Smeagol's tenuous influence vanishes and Gollum's darker side takes full control. The rules no longer matter after Bilbo's question. Fair play is irrelevant now, and all that matters is the ring. In that moment, we see exactly how fragile that honor really is. The riddle game, for Gollum, wasn't about mutual respect, it was about control. When he loses that, the pretense collapses. We can argue that it's Bilbo's fault, and ponder if Bilbo had won fair and square whether Gollum would have upheld his end of the bargain, but we'll never know for sure. All we know is that once the rules were perceived as being violated, all bets are off. From a mythological standpoint, this moment is almost inevitable. In many old tales, the guardian figure who poses the riddle is bound to honor the outcome, but there are plenty of stories where the guardian tries to cheat when they lose, unwilling to let the challenger pass. Gollum fits this pattern perfectly. The moment the game's results threaten his deepest obsession, he reverts to violence. Psychologically, this makes sense. Gollum's sense of self is already shattered. The Smeagol side clings to scraps of decency, such as honoring the rules of the riddle game, but the Gollum side sees those rules as expendable when the stakes are high and quickly forsakes them altogether when necessary. When the ring enters the equation, the Gollum side wins every time. And this is what is so great about this chapter, and why it is one of my favorite parts of the whole saga. It works on all these levels at once. It's great writing. It's a suspenseful, tightly written scene in its own right. It's a nod to the centuries of riddle game tradition all the way from ancient Egypt to medieval England. It's a mythic echo of the Oedipus-Sphinx encounter, and it's a deep character study of one of Tolkien's most complex and intriguing creations, Gollum. For Bilbo, the stakes are just as high. Without Gollum's guidance, he'll never find his way out of the goblin tunnels. He's as trapped as Oedipus before the Sphinx, unable to go back, unable to go forward unless he passes the test. In both cases, the hero has nothing to lose by playing. If they refuse, they die. If they lose, they die. The only hope lies in winning. That's why I think Tolkien's choice of the riddle game here is so perfect. It's not just a quaint medieval throwback. It's a ritual trial, one that puts the characters on equal footing for just long enough to make the outcome uncertain. If it were just a mere contest of strength, Gollum would always win. And it's one of the rare moments where Bilbo's wit, not Gandalf's magic, and not the swords of Bilbo's dwarf companions, is the decisive weapon. So the next time you read The Hobbit or watch one of the film adaptations, pay close attention to the riddle game. See it not just as a clever plot device, but as part of a storytelling tradition that stretches back thousands of years. Think of Oedipus and the Sphinx, of medieval poets and bawdy riddles, of ancient scribes in Egypt scratching puzzles onto papyrus. Think of the long line of guardians and challengers who have played for the highest stakes. And think of Gollum, once a curious hobbit who might have played such games for fun, now a broken creature, still clinging, for a moment, to the one tradition he hasn't entirely abandoned. That's my take. I'd love to hear yours. Do you see Gollum as a Sphinx figure? Do you think Tolkien was drawing more from the Exeter book, from Greek myth, or from somewhere else entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and of course, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Literary Rover.